Although there is a widely accepted theory to the origin of orcs, some indecision from Tolkien's part has led to some confusion and debate between the readers, given that Tolkien wrote about the subject many times and each time gave a new explanation for it. On this video I'm going to explore the main theories presented by Tolkien and their arguments. The oldest theory proposed by Tolkien can be found in the Fall of Gondolin, from the Book of Lost Tales, and it tells us that orcs were made of slime through the sorcery of Morgoth, bred from the heats and slimes of the earth. However, it is consistently stated in Tolkien's other writings, with regards to his creation myth, that only Eru Ilúvatar can create new life from nothing. Therefore, by whatever means the orcs came into being, it is certain that either they were descended from other beings, or a deliberate manifestation of Ilúvatar's thoughts. So this theory is eventually refuted. This is the most accepted theory, and it states that, as Melkor was the first to learn of the awakening of the elves, he enslaved some of them and took them to Utumno, where he distorted and corrupted their minds and bodies, and eventually creating orcs. This theory is the one used in Peter Jackson's films. In the film The Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring, Saruman uses this theory when explaining Lurtz, the origin of orcs. Of course, this leaves open the possibility of one of the mixed origins, which I will speak about during this video, being true in the films, as this was how they first appeared, not discounting other corrupted creatures or men being added to the ranks later. Another of Tolkien's theories proposes that orcs may have begun as soulless beasts of vaguely humanoid shapes, empowered by the will of the Dark Lord Morgoth, and learning language only as parrots do. This theory is supported by an essay wrote by Tolkien himself that says, "The orcs were beasts of humanized shape, to mock men and elves, deliberately perverted and converted into a more close resemblance to man. Melkor taught them speech, and as they bred they inherit this, and they had just as much independence as have, say, dogs or horses of their human masters. This talking was largely echoic." However, later in the same text, he returns to the theory that some orcs may have been elves, but this time he talks about elves being mated with these beasts and with men, instead of tortured and mutilated. There are hints in the History of Middle-earth series of books, especially in Morgoth's Ring, the section Myths Transform, that some orc leaders, such as the First Age Bulldog or the Great Goblin encountered by Bilbo and the dwarves, may in fact have been fallen Maiar, which had taken orc form, given that, as Tolkien said himself, Melkor had in his service great numbers of the Maiar, who had the power, as had their master, of taking visible and tangible shape in Arda. But even the most common orcs may be descendants of Maiar who took an orcish form, which was explained by Tolkien in Morgoth's Ring, stating, "Melkor had corrupted many spirits, some great as Sauron or less so as Balrogs. The least could have been primitive and much more powerful and perilous orcs." While Tolkien at some point saw all orcs as descendant from the original corrupted and tortured elves, later comments of his indicate, according to Christopher Tolkien, that he began to feel uncomfortable with this theory, and so he began searching for a new origin for the orcs. It seems Tolkien wanted to change the origin of the orcs to make them corrupted and twisted humans. He says of this human origin view of the orcs, "This view of the origin of the orcs thus meets with the difficulties of chronology, but though men may take comfort in this, the theory remains nonetheless the most probable. It accords with all that is known of Melkor and of the nature and behavior of orcs, and of men. Melkor was impotent to produce any living thing, but skilled with the corruption of things that did not proceed from himself. Also, in the Unfinished Tales there is a passage about the Druedain which says, 'To the unfriendly who, not knowing them well, declare that Morgoth must have bred the orcs from such a stock, the Eldar answered, Doubtless Morgoth, since he can make no living thing, bred orcs from various kinds of men, but a Druedain must have escaped this shadow.' But for this theory to be true, Tolkien would have to change the prehistory of Arda, for the awakening of men to happen earlier, for there to have been men for Morgoth and Sauron to corrupt. A late idea of Tolkien seems to be that orcs had a mixed origin of elves and men. The text 9 of the Myths Transformed section of Morgoth's Ring shows this view. The text has no date, but it uses the late spelling orc with a K instead of orc with a C. This new spelling was adopted in a note of 1969. Since Melkor could not create an independent species, but had immense powers of corruption and distortion of those who came into his power, it is probable that these orcs had a mixed origin. Most of them plainly and biologically were corruption of elves, and probably later also of men. Tolkien also suggests that men were crossbred with orcs under Morgoth's lieutenant Sauron, and possibly under Morgoth himself. The process was later repeated during the War of the Ring by Saruman. This possibly refers to the way the Uruk-hai and the half-orcs were created. In The Lord of the Rings, as Tolkien states, there is no doubt that long afterwards in the Third Age, Sauron rediscovered this, or learned of it in lore, and in his lust for mastery committed this, his wickedest deed, the interbreeding of orcs and men, producing both men-orcs large and cunning, and orc-men treacherous and vile. And throughout The Lord of the Rings there are many references to this interbreeding, suggesting that they look mostly human but share some of the features of orcs. So as you can see, there are many theories hinted by Tolkien for the origin of orcs, but we can presume that eventually comes down to a combination of most of them, where Morgoth mated them with each other and other races to corrupt them even more every time.